After that overview of female reproductive cycle, now we will discuss that what happens in pre-ovulatory phase, that what are the events that occur before the process of ovulation. So now in this lecture we will be discussing what is the pre-ovulatory phase of female reproductive cycle. So again, this is a prepubescent girl, and in her ovary there would be about 40,000 primordial follicles that would be present in her ovary. And what are these primordial follicles? They consist of primary oocyte, right? They consist of primary oocyte arrested in prophase 1 of meiosis, and these primary oocytes, they are surrounded by a flattened layer of follicular cells. So this whole structure, this primary oocyte surrounded by layer of these follicular cells, this whole structure is named as primordial follicle. And we have already discussed this, but let's just repeat here that from where this came. We have discussed that before a female is born, she start creating these primordial follicles, and these primordial follicles, they remain in her ovary till she is born, and then she become a prepubescent girl. But meanwhile, many of these primordial follicles, they die out, and those that remain, each month one of them is released, right? So let's start the lecture. So there is a term called menarche. When the menstrual cycle first time start in the lifetime of a female, it is called menarche. So what is menarche? Menarche simply means start of menstrual cycle, or the first menstrual cycle of a female. The event when first menstrual cycle of female start, we call it menarche. And menarche is of course the start of female menstrual cycle, and then this female menstrual cycle, it continues each month, right? Each month a new cycle start, and this process continues month by month till the menopause. And menopause is about the age of 50 years. That is average. Of course there is some range, we will not discuss that right now. And menarche, the average age of menarche is about 13 years, 13 or 14 years. I'm not good at remembering numbers, right? So let's discuss that what happens with a single primordial follicle. Each month what happens that about 15 to 20 primordial follicles start growing, and out of these 15 to 20 primordial follicles, single best follicle, and that will not be primordial follicle by that time, single best follicle, single best grown up follicle is released out of the ovary into fallopian tube. We will discuss just now. So this is a single primordial follicle. What is the first step? The first step is that these flattened or squamous cells, follicular cells, they grow up a bit, right? And as they grow in size, they are now no more flattened, they become cuboidal, right? So as these follicles, they become from flattened to cuboidal, they are now not primordial follicle, but they are now called, what they are called, primary follicle. And because it is consisting of a single layer of follicle, so it is of course unilamellar. This is also unilamellar, but because it is always, primordial follicle is always having a single layer, so we do not call it unilamellar, as it is obvious, we just call it primordial follicle. But primary follicle, later on we will learn that primary follicle having can be consisting of single layer or more than one layer. So primary follicle can be unilamellar or multilamellar, right? Now at this point, this follicle, it is not having any receptor to mate with its mate. What is the mate of this follicle? Of course, the sperm. So it forms a special glycoprotein coat, a special glycoproteinaceous layer is formed in between this follicular cell and oocyte, and this glycoprotein coat, it harbors species specific sperm receptors, right? And this layer is called, this glycoprotein layer is called zona pellucida. Pellucida means transparent or translucent, and zona is layer, so it is kind of translucent, so that is why it is called zona pellucida. And what does it contain? Zona pellucida harbors species specific sperm receptors, right? Clear up till now? Then what happens? That of course, as the female is maturing, she is advancing in her age, her brain also start maturing, and her hypothalamus, it starts releasing a special substance called gonadotrophin releasing hormone. And gonadotrophin releasing hormone passes to the anterior pituitary, and here it stimulates particular cells in the anterior pituitary to release gonadotrophs. What are gonadotrophs? Gonadotrophs are special hormones that have effects on gonads. What are female gonads? Ovary, right? So these are, namely, these are called FSH and LH. FSH and LH are called gonadotrophs or gonadotrophic hormones. Trophic means to provide nutrition, to provide nourishment, to help in growing, right? And gonad mean ovary, so they help these follicles to grow inside the ovary, so that is why they are called gonadotrophs. And gonadotrophs are, from where they are released? They are released from anterior pituitary, but they are released on the order of hypothalamus. And hypothalamus is very small part of the brain. It is the size of about a fingernail, and it is very important part of the brain. Rather, I should say, it is very important part of your whole body. It has many different functions, and it has some role in your mood as well as in the control of autonomic nervous system, right? So here something important to mention is that because this follicular phase, we are talking this pre-ovulatory or follicular phase, because this follicular phase, it is orchestrated by FSH and LH, and this FSH and LH, because they are released on the orders of hypothalamus, and orders come in the form of GnRH. That is why this part, this phase of ovarian cycle or female reproductive cycle, this phase, or I mean follicular phase of this cycle, it is much more variable, and it is affected by the mood of a woman. It is affected by environmental factors surrounding the woman, right? Why so? You got the point, because hypothalamus is involved in all these things, right? Hypothalamus has an important role in mood, right? So that is why, because this part is controlled by hypothalamus, it is much more likely to be variable as compared to post-ovulatory phase, right? Previously I have just told you that this part is variable, but I have not mentioned this important detail. So here is the one of the reason. Of course, it is a multifactorial thing. We are not sure the exact reason, and one of the reason is this. So FSH, it was at this baseline, so FSH started increasing. So here is that FSH level of FSH in blood increased, right? It rise up, right? Along with that, level of LH also increased. in blood, and as it increased, as the level of these two hormones it increased in blood, they affected the these follicles in the ovaries, right? So here another important thing is that from primordial follicle the up to formation of primary follicle, I mean unilaminar primary follicle, it is said that it is independent of FSH and LH. From this point and beyond, FSH and LH are important. And out of this, if I ask you what is the most important factor for growth of follicle, especially at this point, that would be FSH. As the name indicates, it is follicle stimulating hormone. LH also has important role in development of these follicles, but we will discuss a bit later. So mainly under the effect of FSH and to some extent LH, this primary follicle, which is unilaminar, it proliferates, it increases in size as well as it increases the number of cells. So new layer will be formed, more than 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on. New layers of follicular cells are formed, and not just that, it is not depicted in this diagram, but size of primary oocyte also increases, right? These two things are going on side by side. Primary oocyte is also growing, as well as these follicular cells, they are also growing and proliferating, right? So now this primary follicle, it is no more unilaminar, it has now become multilamellar primary follicle. Lamellar or lamella means layer, so it is having multi layers of follicular cells, so it is primary follicle that is multilamellar. Then what happens that some interstitial cells, right, the cells that are present in the interstitium surrounding this place, some interstitium or interstitial connective tissue, it surrounds this follicle. Interstitial connective tissue surrounds the follicle, and it surrounds the follicle like a casing or covering, outer casing or covering. And this casing or covering, it is called, what it is called, it is called theca, right? So theca is formed, and this theca consists of two layers, theca interna, which is more cellular, and outside the theca interna is theca externa, which is less cellular but more vascular. It has more vasculature, it has more blood vessels, right? So theca interna and theca externa. Now here a very important role of LH that must be discussed, that of course, as I've told you, that level of FSH and LH both are rising in blood. So here along with FSH, LH specially acts on these theca cells, especially theca interna cells, and it causes these theca cells to release testosterone. You know, in males we have Leydig cells, and you remember these Leydig cells, they also came from interstitium. They are also called interstitial cells, and another name of Leydig cells is interstitial cells. I am talking about males. In females, these interstitial cells, they are not Leydig cell, but they are similar to Leydig cell. They are called theca cells. But as they say, nature cannot be changed. So Leydig cells were secreting which hormone in males? Testosterone. So in this case, these are not Leydig cells, but these are, you can say, female counterpart of Leydig cells. These theca cells, they are also secreting testosterone and on the order of LH. So those cells in males, Leydig cells, they were also secreting testosterone on the order of LH, and here they are doing, Theca cells are doing the same. But fortunately, these Theca cells, and maybe this is the reason that these Theca cells, they are closely associated with these follicular cells, and these follicular cells being the real girlish cells, they convert this testosterone into estrogen. They have special aromatic compound, not aromatic compound. There is an enzyme called aromatase. So they have special enzyme called aromatase which converts the testosterone into estrogen. So Theca cells, they produce testosterone, but this testosterone, it is picked up by follicular cells and converted into estrogen, and they use aromatase enzyme to do so, right? So estrogen has many important functions in female: development of primary and secondary sexual characteristics, development of breast, development of that particular hip shape in females, right? So along with that, estrogen here inside it is also having a special function. Now as this estrogen, as these follicular cells, they start secreting estrogen, they also become filled with granules of estrogen, right? They become filled with granules of estrogen. So these cells are now called granulosa cells. So follicular cells, now they are called granulosa cells. Estrogen, as I have told you here, estrogen is having another important function, and that function is to produce special LH receptor on these follicular cells. Previously, LH receptors were mainly present on Theca cells, but now LH receptors are also present on granulosa cells, right? And that is due to estrogen. Of course, it is not that simple. Many different factors are involved, but I am just trying to simplify it as much as possible. So as it continue to grow, as these follicles, of course this is not single follicle that is growing, I'm just showing single follicle, but about 15 to 20 follicles are growing. They start growing each month. So as these follicles are growing, the level of estrogen rises in blood. The level of estrogen rises in blood, and what this estrogen will do, estrogen will go to uterus and it will order the uterus that start preparing the home for baby. As I have told you that females are quite optimistic creatures of God, that if as soon as these follicles start growing, they hope that pregnant, I'm not, I should not say hope, but rather I should say they are so sure that pregnancy will occur that they start creating the home for baby. And this is a very special, beautiful home, multi-story home with a special tree and windows here. And where the home will be formed? Home will be formed in the endometrium. Endometrium is the innermost, it is the innermost layer of uterus, and before this home start forming, it is having only single layer, and that single layer of endometrium, that is always present. This single layer is called basal layer. It is called basal layer of endometrium. And on the order of estrogen from ovary, this home start growing. On this land, a beautiful multi-story home began to form. What I mean by this is that this endometrium proliferates, right? It has become now multi-layered. Now it is having 3 layers. Along with that, these windows, I mean these glands are formed. right? And these blood vessels are, these are trees. So this basal layer or stratum basale, it is always present. Then these two new layers are formed. The middle layer is stratum spongiosum or spongy layer. Stratum spongiosum. It contains this, mainly this major part of these glands, these uterine glands. And finally the innermost is the compact layer, and it is called, what it is called, stratum compactum. It consists of dense connective tissue compactly arranged and necks of these glands, right? So what happened, due to the order of estrogen, this endometrium of uterus, it proliferated, right? And it formed a multi-layered, it formed multiple layers, and that is the home for baby. That if pregnancy occurs, then baby will come into these layers, and it will grow in these layers, right? Then what happens again on the orders of FSH and LH, it continue, follicle continue to grow, and again it forms many more layers, 8 to 10 layers may be formed, right? Then uh, some special pockets of fluid are formed in between these cells, and this fluid, it is mainly secreted by these follicular cells, and mainly it consists of substances that are secreted by these follicular cells, but it also has a contribution from transudate of blood vessels, that some blood vessels that are present here, some fluid, it seeps out of these blood vessels, right? And this fluid, it forms this pockets of follicular fluid. So these pockets of follicular fluid, they coalesce to form this complete structure, that is antrum. And as soon as these pockets of follicular fluid they form this structure, it is no more primary follicle, it is now a secondary follicle, right? What it is, it is secondary follicle. Clear up till now? And this structure, it is now called antrum, and again it is still secondary follicle. But inside this secondary follicle, this oocyte that is present, it is still primary oocyte, it is still arrested in meiosis 1, prophase 1 of meiosis 1, specifically in diplotin stage. Now here something important I should discuss, and rather I should mention, that there is some discrepancy in naming scheme. Some authors they like to call this as primary follicle, and as soon as this follicular layers become multiple, that is multi-layered, that this follicle become multi-layered, they call this as secondary follicle. And when this antrum forms, they call it tertiary follicle, right? So there is some discrepancy, so I thought that I should have mentioned it here, so that is why I am mentioning. But this classification which I have mentioned in this slide, it is most accepted one. Most of the books they follow this classification. For example, even the Keith Moore and Langman, Larson, and major books of embryology, they are following this type of classification. Then these follicular cells, rather I should say granulosa cell, now they are granulosa cells. So these granulosa cells that are surrounding this primary oocyte, right, they look like a cloud of cell, a cloudy substance that is surrounding the oocyte. So this structure that they form by surrounding this oocyte, it is called cumulus oophorus. Cumulus mean clouds, oophorus mean that they are surrounding the oocyte. So this is cumulus oophorus. And it's worth mentioning here that it is still arrested in prophase 1. Meanwhile, many more LH receptors are formed up till now. Almost all of the granulosa cells, they are primed to listen to LH. So here what happens that, of course, as I have told you, 15 to 20 primordial follicles started growing, but they were growing at their own pace. Some grow slowly, some grow quickly and swiftly, right? As you might have observed that in your class, not every student is super brilliant and super excellent academic wise. Similar to that, these follicles, they also cannot, each and every follicle, it cannot grow at much faster pace, and only one of the follicle will dominate all others. As you have some topper in your class who dominates academically, who dominates all other students. So here also this single follicle is which is dominating, which has overgrown, which has outgrown all other follicles. It is called dominant follicle, and all other follicles, they are non-dominant follicles. Now here something interesting happens. Of course, estrogen level will continue to rise because follicles, they continue to grow, and follicles will continue to secrete more and more estrogen, right? But here what happens that as estrogen rises too much, it probably through feedback inhibition, it causes a decline in FSH level. So as estrogen, so here you can see, as estrogen level rises, FSH levels slightly, it gradually continue to decline, right? But LH level, it remains mostly unaffected. And now what happens? As we had many follicles growing at their own pace, the dominant follicle can tolerate the decrease in FSH. Because it is dominant, it is not just dominant, but it is also now have become independent of FSH. And because it has become independent of support from FSH, it will still survive even if FSH level drops. But these poor kids, they were still dependent upon FSH, so they die out. And this process is called follicular atresia, right? Dr. Najeeb has used a beautiful analogy to illustrate this concept, and with his permission, I am gonna re-mention that analogy here. You know what he says? Dr. Najeeb says that this anterior pituitary, it is like a father, and these growing follicles are like children of that father. And because they are still kids and they are growing, right? So anterior pituitary provide them financial support to help them grow, and it provides financial help to them in the form of FSH. And when these children, they continue to grow and they start secreting their own estrogen, their own hormone, their own estrogen, and estrogen is their cash, right? So as they start earning their own cash, that is their own estrogen, the father, I mean anterior pituitary, it pulls up the cash, it pulls up that financial support in the form of FSH. And as it pulls that financial support and FSH level starts declining, only one single child which has now become financially independent of FSH, only that is able to survive, and all other poor children, they die out, right? So that's what happening in this pre-ovulatory phase. So what's happening in the pre-ovulatory phase? These follicles are growing, right? So follicles are growing, and this is called follicular phase, right? So pre-ovulatory phase is follicular phase of ovarian cycle. And in regards to ovary, what is in regards to uterus, what is happening in uterus, that in first 4-5 days, the uterine wall which was formed, the functional uterine wall, the other two layers, what were these two layers? Stratum spongiosum and stratum compactum. Basal remains there, but these two layers, compactum and spongiosum, they are shed out. They are shed off in initial 4-5 days, and that is called menstruation. And in later days, estrogen from these follicles, it causes the proliferation. It causes the proliferation of uterine wall, proliferation of endometrium. So it is proliferative phase of uterine cycle. So pre-ovulatory phase is also follicular phase of ovarian cycle, and it is also menstruation in first 5 days followed by proliferative phase of uterine cycle, right? So I think this cycle is very easy to understand. Even this much information is enough for you, and it is happening like a falling domino. Everything is very logically happening. That first of all, what happens, that hypothalamus start releasing GnRH, which causes release of FSH, and FSH causes follicular growth, and follicular growth leads to formation of estrogen, and estrogen causes uterine proliferation. And this much is the pre-ovulatory phase of this cycle. I don't think it is any difficult. I don't know why the textbook makes so much fuss about this cycle. It is very easy and simple. So this much information is enough for most of you people. But I want to mention some important points that brilliant doctors and brilliant students must know that. So, you know, this part of uterus, this is called cervix. Okay, so here is the cervix. So what is cervix? Cervix is the part of uterus. It is the lower part of uterus which connects the body of uterus with vagina. Right? It connects the body of uterus with vagina. And as I have told you previously, as with this female reproductive cycle, changes occur in almost every part of the female body. And of course, as cervix is a part of uterus, some important changes also occur in cervix. First of all, what is the situation of cervix before the cycle start? That these holes of cervix, these are called cervical os. The cervical os, internal and external cervical os, they are almost completely closed at the beginning of cycle. But as estrogen level rises, as estrogen level rises, these cervical os, they slightly open up. At the beginning of cycle, cervix was quite firm, but now before the ovulation start, and we will discuss ovulation in next lecture, before the ovulation start, as the estrogen level is too high, this too much high estrogen, it causes the cervix to become elastic and soft, and the cervical os open up, because this is the fertile period of female, and during this duration, sperm has to come and sperm can easily enter. But that is not just that. Cervical glands present here, they secrete special hair-like strands of mucus. So these mucosal strands, these hair-like structure, they are arranged parallel to each other to allow a special to welcome the sperm into this uterine cavity, right? Along with that, what happens to mucus, the mucus that is secreted by these mucosal glands, what happens to cervical mucus is that initially the mucus is thick and dry, but as estrogen level continue to rise gradually, the mucus levels start to become thin and watery. So here mucus was dry, but at this point mucus is very thin and watery. What is the significance of this is that this thin and watery mucus, it allows the sperm to easily go inside. Of course, there are many other changes that occur, but I don't think we should discuss all the changes here because that should be discussed in a separate lecture. Finally, another important point is that as the estrogen level peaks up, as estrogen level reaches a peak, there is slight dip in basal body temperature curve. There is slight decrease in basal body temperature, and this is a crude sign of ovulation, that now ovulation will start within a day or two, right? Along with that, because this is a fertile period of female and estrogen level is very high, estrogen causes increase in libido of a female. As I have told you, there is even behavioral changes in female with this cycle. Initially, as the menstruation occurs and bleeding occurs, female is a bit aggressive. But during this fertile period, female sexual desire increases, right? And I think she becomes more polite, right? So this was about pre-ovulatory phase of female reproductive cycle. In next lecture we will discuss ovulation and peri-ovulatory phase, that what happens before, immediately before and after ovulation. Thank you so much for watching this video.